Trying to get everything set up. 1 minute, guys. Stony Progressive, welcome to Sunday Night Interview Review. Late night stream where we get high, we chill, and we check out the week's interviews. Doing a little political show tonight, guys. Thanks for joining. Let's get stoned and check some shit out. Just my uncopyrighted chill music to start the show. I got a bowl packed. It's white 99. Supposedly a hybrid. It literally shuts my eyes, so I'm gonna go slant-eyed so hard here. It just puts the lids right on down. So yeah, hybrid. So yeah, but let's smoke some good green. I got Noam Chomsky interview from the week to start. Not gonna agree with Noam on everything, but we respect Noam, right? I mean, he did write a ground-changing book. And so we respect Noam. We got to check him out. Should be a good interview. And then after that, I got Mitch McConnell, Antony Blinken. There was a crypto interview I wanted to check out. So we got a few interviews for the day. But the first one, let's blaze out. Let's watch some Noam Chomsky, get into the mood. And yeah. Let's start this Sunday night interview out with a nice bowl and some very, very interesting dialogue, huh? Again, I'm not going to agree with everything Noam says. Noam's also like 100, so we're going to definitely have to speed this up to 1.25 at least. And they're quiet because they're old.
That NATO is not a defensive alliance.
Cheers, guys.
We further stipulate that when the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, NATO should have itself been dissolved. And we finally stipulate that the expansion of NATO, particularly with Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, was wrong and provocative. Those are the three important stipulations in the interest of getting right into some central questions that many of us on the left seem to be avoiding. With no further ado, I want to welcome you, Noam, to this discussion. Thank you very much for doing this.
Well,
And thank you, the sunking, the sunking one. It's interesting. Cheers.
I think the stipulations are correct, and I would like to add another, which I think is also beyond discussion. Whatever the explanation for the Russian invasion, important, crucial question. The invasion itself was a criminal act, a criminal act of aggression, the supreme international crime, on a par with other such horrific violations of international law and fundamental human rights, like the US invasion of Iraq, the Hitler-Stalin invasion of Poland, and all too many other examples. So why did it happen? Well, there is a background. The background is what you began to discuss. If we go back to the early 1990s, when the current issue begins to develop, the Soviet Union collapsed. President George H.W. Bush, his Secretary of State James Baker, negotiated with Mikhail Gorbachev, Russian leader. In the background were the major German political figures, Hans Genscher, Helmut Kohl. Germany was directly involved in this, and they reached an agreement. The agreement was a firm, explicit agreement. There's been a lot of prevarication about this, so if you want the details, I'd simply suggest looking at the authoritative National Security Archive, which has the original documents easily accessible. The agreement was that Russia would agree to allowing Germany to be unified and to join NATO, which is quite a commitment on the part of Russia if you look back to the history of the 20th century. But they agreed on the condition, the explicit formal condition, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east.
There we go, Gnome. Gnome's agreeing right off the bat. He said that Russia is 100% to blame for this, but then he goes right on to say that NATO agreed not to move 1 inch east. All right, well, I mean, he's 1,000 years old. He's gonna see some things, but generally, the guy that did manufacturing consent usually knows how this works.
That commitment was adhered to by President Bush number one. Mm-hmm. The early years of Clinton followed for a couple of years. He kept to it too. By 1994, he was already talking from two sides of his mouth. I'm now quoting and paraphrasing Ambassador Chas Freeman, one of the most astute, highly respected American diplomats who was directly involved in all of these issues at the time and has been since. As Freeman points out, Clinton started talking in both sides of his mouth. To Russia, he was saying, we'll live up to the agreement. In the United States, domestically, addressing ethnic minorities like the Polish population and with an eye on domestic votes, he was saying, we'll do something to bring frontline states like Poland, Hungary, Slovenia into NATO. He was getting harsh condemnation of this from his close friend, supposedly Boris Yeltsin, who he helped keep in power by direct interference in Russian elections. Yeltsin was strongly objected again in 1996, 1997. Clinton went ahead anyway and broke the agreement to Gorbachev. He invited Poland, Hungary, Slovenia into NATO. The Russians objected, didn't do much about it. 1999, it's a complicated story, can't go into the details, but the Clinton administration decided to bomb Serbia, close US-Russian ally, didn't even bother informing the Russians. There was a pretext. The pretext was to stop Serbian atrocities in Kosovo. There's a slight problem with that pretext. It requires inverting the chronology. The wasn't a pleasant place, but the atrocities were the predicted and anticipated consequence of the bombing. There is no ambiguity about that. There's been a lot of lying about it, inverting the chronology, but it's very firmly established. Well, that was first of all a crime in itself, but also it instigated huge atrocities, exactly as was predicted by the commanding general Wesley Clark, but also was undertaken in a way to humiliate Russia. The same was true later under Obama with the bombing of Libya and, of course, the Iraq War in 2003. Mm-hmm. Russia didn't like it, but accepted it. George W. Bush, he just opened the doors, invited practically everybody and all the former Russian satellites into NATO. Also in 2008, W. Bush, the second Bush, invited Ukraine to join NATO. That was vetoed by France and Germany, but it was kept open on the table in deference to the United States. Just about every high-level U.S. diplomat who had any familiarity with the situation, including current head of the CIA and others, warned once again that this is extremely reckless and dangerous. These are Russia's red lines, the heart of their geostrategic concerns.
Was that on my end, guys? Was that them? I get something on. Is that an alert I don't know about? I don't know what just happened. Sorry. That must have been a notification on their end.
U.S. went ahead. It continued. The U.S. backed, some say, helped instigate the 2014 Maidan uprising, which led immediately to almost direct efforts by what's called NATO, meaning the United States, to help integrate Ukraine more or less within some kind of NATO-style framework, sending weapons, training, and so on. The most significant current information that we have is an important document of the Biden administration, September 1st, 2021. You can read it on the White House webpage. I've quoted it a number of times in material you can find on Truthout, and it's worth paying attention to. It's been silenced by the US press. I haven't seen a single reference to it, but we can be certain that Russian intelligence was reading it. What it says, it calls for, I'm quoting it, providing Ukraine with advanced anti-tank weapons with a robust training and exercise program in keeping with Ukraine's status as a NATO enhanced opportunities partner. Basically opens the door wider for Ukraine to join NATO. I'll quote it again. It finalized a strategic defense framework that creates a foundation for enhancement of US-Ukraine strategic defense and security cooperation with advanced weapons, training, and so on, again, in keeping with Ukraine's status as a NATO enhanced opportunities partner. Well, that's last September. That's the latest, most recent official statement that we have about US policy. To go back.
No, so you've laid out important background on the US side of this equation. What I want to try to get at right now then is, how do you analyze the Putin regime? Let me just cut to the chase. On the night that the invasion was launched, Putin did something that I thought was highly unusual. Instead of harping on NATO, which probably would have scored him a lot of brownie points, he ended up denouncing the national existence of Ukraine, calling it national fiction, and elaborating things that he had started talking about in the summer of 2021, he himself, that claimed that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus were all the same people. And it was a very weird thing for Putin to be saying at that point when he's trying to justify an invasion. He was basically saying, you have no reason to exist, we're coming in. And so I want to know from you, how do you analyze the Putin regime? It's so curious, Noam. It's like the Russians are very tied in with transnational capital, yet you have a regime that has a nationalist, expansionist agenda. What do you make of that?
Well, that was indeed the announcement on the eve of the invasion. And I presume he was stating what he has already always believed, as he stated publicly many times, along with many other Russians. The decision of Gorbachev to break up the Soviet system, which was in fact an imperial system in which Russia had non-Russian satellites that it controlled. Breaking up the Soviet Union, he said, was a great tragedy and strategic error. This is often quoted. He also said something else, which is rarely quoted. He said that anyone who wants to reestablish the Soviet Union and its former borders is out of his mind. And in fact, that's true. Russia has, whatever Putin may believe, they certainly haven't even the minimal capacity to do anything like that. Russia is a state with an economy roughly at the size of Spain and Italy. A weak, kleptocratic, raw materials exporting state with a big army, huge army, and advanced weapons, nuclear weapons, but a declining kleptocracy based on raw materials export. It's not about to conquer anybody. Inconceivable. Ukraine is indeed a special case, as it's been for 30 years. Well, that was Putin's statement.
I gotta say this again. This guy is ancient. We should not be interviewing him anymore. He wrote a fantastic book. He has declined in his speed of interest. I mean, I got him at 1.25 right now, and he's still putting me to sleep. Let's move up to 1.5. Jesus, man, you were slow today.
But there were also official Russian statements at the same time about what their precise goals were in Ukraine. They were coming from Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister, other leading officials. They stated that the main goals were neutralization and demilitarization of Ukraine. Secondarily, establishment of what they call security, meaning taking over the Donbass regions. Crimea is just off the table. We may not like it, but it's a fact of life. Those were the official statements about the invasion. What Putin has in the back of his mind is for his people, is of interest to people concerned with his mind. I'm interested in the policies. Well, those policies are basically within the framework of what everyone knows is the possible negotiated settlement. It's been true for a long time. Before the invasion, it was quite clear.
Again, Noam Chomsky in 2015 said any Russian leader would have to invade if they try to make Ukraine a UN nation. He said this in 2015 in an interview. This back when, 2015, when he was a little bit more on it still. He's like 90 now. He should not be doing these. He should not be our go-to person. He still is, so we still have to pay attention. He wrote the book. I think he's a little behind on this 8 ball. He's fallen a little behind, but he did write the book, right? So manufacturing consent, it's what you need to know. I was thinking about on Tuesday reading a couple clips from that book, because yeah, I need to start highlighting my books when I read them. I'm gonna go through and start highlighting books. Yeah. All right. Well, let's listen to the old man again.
Stated clearly that any peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict will have to involve what Lavrov called the main goals: neutralization of Ukraine and what they call demilitarization, which means removing military weapons and that threaten Russia. In other words, a status very much like Mexico. It's not written on paper, but everyone with a brain functioning knows that Mexico cannot join a Chinese-run hostile military alliance within, to quote Biden's position, within a Chinese-enhanced, a Chinese.
Yeah, he definitely wrote the book. No, that's the idiot. I fucking did this the other day, didn't I? It's in my car. It's in my car because when I take the girls to doctor's offices, I need something to read, and that's my car book right now. You should always have a car book. If you're stuck in the car, have a book. Or you should be better than me and maybe have like an audio book or a podcast that you're addicted to. I save podcasts for my long trips. Have a book in the car. Freaking, you get to work 20 minutes early, read the book. You get out of work and you need a few minutes before you drive home, read the book. You get to an appointment and the doctor's not ready for you, you got the book. I have a book by the bed and a book by the car. Usually the book by the bed is fiction, the book in the car is nonfiction. That's my way. That's how I roll.
regime enhanced opportunities partner with China, providing robust training and exercise programs with the Chinese army and placing weapons on the Mexican border. All of that is just so far out of the question that you can't even begin to discuss it. Well, that's essentially what Lavrov, the official statement, was proposing for Ukraine. Whether it could have worked, we don't know, because the effort wasn't made to try it and see if it could work. Maybe it, instead what we had was Biden's policy statement, which I quoted. No.
But here's my concern, Noam. In 1994, the Ukrainians and Russians signed the Budapest Accords, in which, as you know, the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, and they had the third largest nuclear arsenal on the planet. But they gave it up on a condition that Russia would never attack them. And it would be interesting if they hadn't signed that pact, what kind of discussion we'd be having today. But leaving that aside for a second, that was the agreement. There was very little interest in Ukraine in joining NATO until 2014, when the Crimea is seized and the Russians start supporting these secessionist movements. And so I'm concerned when you're talking about the issue of Russians wanting security. It doesn't sound like they want security. It sounds like more they wanted a satellite state.
Is Mexico a satellite state of the United States?
That's a very interesting question.
That is solid. Thank you, Gnome. He disappoints me a bit, but that was a solid question. That was solid. Thank you, Gnome. You got to attack this shit. You can't let them get away with everything.
For much of the 20th century,
Austria,
it was a neo colony.
Austria wasn't anybody's satellite state. Finland wasn't anybody's satellite state. They're like Mexico. They were neutral. Austria was neutral by treaty. Finland, neutral by treaty.
Right.
They could be as much part of the West as they liked. They became Western-oriented, what we call capitalist democracies, integrated totally into the Western system. They had constraints. They could not enter into a hostile military alliance run by the United States, which carried out military maneuvers on their territory and placed offensive weapons aiming at Russia. Is that an infringement of sovereignty? In some sense, but it certainly had no effect on the life and practice of Austria, Finland, Switzerland, Mexico, and so on. That's the status that might have been achieved for Ukraine if the United States had been willing. Well,
why the United States? Why when you place the responsibility in the United States? And I keep wondering about 2014. I mean, if the Budapest Accord said Russia would not attack Ukraine in exchange for the nuclear weapons, and in 2014 the Russians, disenchanted with what was happening in Ukraine, seized Crimea and promote a secessionist movement in the East, how does that lead the Ukrainians to even believe that the Russians could stand by a treaty? If they broke one, they broke a major one. That's what. So I understand what you're saying about Austria and Finland. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you have that kind of neutralization. But this was after Ukraine, had been the subject of Russian abuse.
Certainly, Ukraine could not assume that Russia would abide by treaty any more than dozens of countries around the world, which have been subjected to U.S. military intervention, could believe that the United States could have faith that the United States would observe a treaty. Mm-hmm. Remember, what the Russians did in Ukraine is, of course, criminal. I have to applaud the New York Times editors a couple of days ago for quoting the Nuremberg Principles and pointing out that Russia violated them by committing, quoting, the supreme international crime, which differs from other war crimes in that it includes the accumulated evil of the whole, everything that follows. Yes, good for the New York Times editors to recognize, to quote that, as far as I know, for the first time in response to Russia's violating it. But of course, the U.S. violates it routinely, just constantly. The U.S. violated it when it invaded Iraq, when it bombed Serbia, when it overthrew the government of Chile, Guatemala, Iran. Just go on. I don't have to go on with this. No. It violates it constantly. Correct. It constantly violates the UN Charter, the supreme law of the land according to the Constitution, which bans the threat or use of force in international affairs. Can you think of a single U.S. president who's lived up to the U.S. Constitution? Well, I can't. Of course, they all.
All right, this is not working. I want to say thanks for the follow, somebody. It's not showing me it today. That's weird. This is... I don't know how to... There we go. Alex Jones was right, followed me. Alex Jones was probably right half the time, huh? I'll have to say at least half the time. That's the thing about, we all have our blind spots. We're all right. There's a reason he's popular.
Violate the supreme law of the land,
It's not because
so
he's always
nobody trusts
wrong.
them. The question is, are the circumstances such that the great powers will live up to their commitments? Not because they're nice guys, they aren't, but because those are the circumstances. So let's suppose that the United States, since the 1990s, suppose it had abided by the warnings of a whole host of US senior statesmen, George Kennan, Ambassador Jack Matlock, Reagan's ambassador to Russia, leading Russian specialist Chas Freeman, who I quoted, another ambassador, directors of the CIA, including the current director, and a long list of other high-level diplomats and government advisors who had made it clear and explicit that though Russia would tolerate a violation of Bush's commitment and regular humiliation up to a point, they did have a red line. The red line was, again, Georgia and Ukraine, which are deep within the Russian geostrategic heartland, as recognized on all sides. So that was the red line. Well, suppose the United States had agreed with these high-level advisors and diplomats and world opinion, and Germany and France, for example, and had recognized the Russian red lines and agreed to a status for Ukraine that was comparable to Austria, Switzerland, Finland, Mexico, and so on. Would Russia have invaded? We don't know for sure, but I think there's a fair probability. There was a way to find out. That would be by withdrawing the September 2021 policy statement, which I quoted, and agreeing to enter into negotiations to see if the general agreed guidelines could be met. Only one way to find out, to try. The U.S. did the opposite. To quote Ambassador Freeman again, the U.S. has chosen, quoting him, to fight to the last Ukrainian. In other words, to abandon any hope for a peaceful settlement and to ensure that the worst will happen. Well, I think Ambassador Freeman is quite accurate. Now, would the Russians have committed the supreme international crime anyway? We don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows. But there were ways to try to avert it. And those ways were not taken and are not being taken now. If you take a look at the current situation, there are two major countries that could do something to try to alleviate the horrors in Ukraine. One of them is China. China could certainly do more to try to move towards alleviating the crisis, press towards negotiations. And I think China should be criticized for not doing that. But the criticisms cannot come from the United States without ridicule, because China is following US official policy. On the US side, it's fight to the last Ukrainian and block the prospects for peace. When President Bush says to Putin, you're a war criminal, we're going to bring you to war crimes trials, that's saying you have no escape. The only choice for you, with your back to the wall, is either commit suicide or use the capacity that you have to destroy Ukraine and to move on to nuclear war. Again, I'm paraphrasing Ambassador Freeman and others who have any concern for the welfare of Ukrainians. Those are the options. But would it succeed? We don't know until you try.
So I hear you. The part of my concern, though, is so you're attributing a lot to the role of the U.S.
Jesus.
But no, every NATO country has a veto.
Again, I have this at 1.5. Oh, so slow.
The entry of another country into NATO. So despite what the United States was pushing, there were at least two NATO countries, Germany and France, that were against the introduction of Ukraine into NATO. Putin knew this. He knew this. How do I know he knew it? Because I know it. And if I know it, Putin knew it. So the question then is, if Putin knew that there were vetoes against Ukraine going into NATO, despite all of the hoopla from the United States, there's something that's missing here. And then you add on to this the claims by Putin that this campaign is about denazifying Ukraine. I mean, it's almost laughable when you look at the fascist character of the Kremlin. So maybe we disagree, or I'm not sure, but what am I missing?
You're missing the nature of international affairs. In international affairs, the fact of the matter is that the United States has overwhelming power. Other countries exist, they can do something, but when the United States lays down the law, they follow it. We know that. Russia certainly knows it. And take our actions. Take, for example, our 60-year war against Cuba, included Kennedy's terrorist war, brutal, harsh, destructive sanctions. The entire world opposes them. Europe opposes them. Take a look at the United Nations vote. Last vote was 184 to 2 against them. United States and Israel. Israel's a satellite, has to vote with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So universal opposition, but universal adherence to them, because they're terrified of the United States. Other countries won't violate US sanctions, even though they oppose them and hate them, because they understand international affairs. They understand that the United States is a violent, rogue state, which will do what it wants. Do I have to run through the history on that?
No, you obviously don't. But there is, Germany had substantial business dealings with Russia.
Right.
France was not interested in some sort of European conflagration. All I'm saying is that it's one thing to go along with the U.S. policy when it's far in the field. What we're dealing with Ukraine, though, was right in the face of the Germans, the French, and other Europeans. And the NATO countries were saying they at least two of them, bigger ones, were saying they did not want Ukraine in.
And they're saying other things too. They hate the Cuba sanctions. They hate the Iran sanctions. They hate lots of other things that the United States does, but they adhere to them because they're terrified of our violent rogue state. They adhere to them, so they oppose them. Now, to get back to your question, if there had been anyone in the Kremlin with any resemblance to being a statesman, what they would have done is quite different from what Putin and the hard men around him decided to do. They would have exploited the opportunity to bring France and Germany into an agreement pretty much along the line of Gorbachev's common European home without military alliances. France and England and Germany, as you mentioned, have very good reasons to want to pursue this possibility. President Macron of France actually, in a very limited way, tried to pursue it with his abortive interchanges with Putin. Would have been a very sensible thing to try to do. That requires statesmanship. Okay, would it have worked? We don't know. Putin and his circle didn't try. They reached for the guns right away, the way other great powers do, like the United States.
Yep. That's huge. Like the other big powers do, like the United States. We are always reaching for the guns first. So, yeah. Not wrong on that at all. Not even a little. That is what we do. We reach for the guns. We don't know diplomacy. Wouldn't know us if it hit us right in the fucking face.
It was a criminal decision, and from their point of view, an utterly stupid decision. What Putin did was provide the United States on a silver platter. It's the greatest gift it could imagine. It handed Germany and France over to the United States, placed them deep in the US pocket, now totally subordinate to the United States, when Russia's interest, including his interest, would have been to try to draw them out of the US orbit and into a framework of the kind that Gorbachev outlined, which was not new, incidentally. A major issue right through the Cold War, since the Second World War, has been what will be the status of Europe? Will Europe be subordinate to the United States within the NATO framework, so-called Atlanticist framework, or will Europe become an independent force in world affairs along the lines that de Gaulle outlined? As he put it, Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals with no military blocks, basically Gorbachev's vision. That's been on the table for 75 years, major issue. The United States, of course, approves the NATO Atlanticist framework. Mm-hmm. Again, if there was a statesman in the Kremlin, they would have explored the Gaullist Gorbachev vision of a European common home with no military alliances. Instead, what they did is reach for the revolver, carry out criminal aggression, severely harming themselves, giving the United States the greatest gift it could imagine. Going back to China and the United States, you can imagine a reason why neither of them, why they're both essentially following the same line, fight to the last Ukrainian and don't do anything to enhance the possibilities of peaceful settlement. In fact, undermine them in the case of the United States by backing Putin to the wall with no escape hatch. A plausible explanation for this joint stand of China and the United States is that they both see the evolving situation as pretty much to their advantage. In Chinese case, it's driving Russia into becoming a subordinate to the Chinese growing system. China is developing a huge system of development loans.
China is loaning people money, helping people build roads. They're building commerce all over the planet. They're doing things in a very diplomatic way. And again, if you didn't hear me 30 seconds ago, the United States doesn't know fucking diplomacy.
For Central Asia, incorporating South Asia, moving to Turkey soon, probably to Central Europe, moving to Africa, even to Southeast Asia, even to U.S. domains in Latin America. if they can draw, Russia's already part of it, but if Russia can become a subordinate member of it, providing raw materials, heavy weapons, its specialty, but nothing else as it declines, that's to China's advantage. What about the United States? Putin, in his criminal foolishness, gave the United States everything that American strategists could want. Put Europe deep in the US pocket. Now they do whatever the United States says. In fact, they're going quite wild. Like in Italy, canceling lectures on Dostoevsky, kicking Russians out of the Russian cats out of an international cat conference. U.S. hawks couldn't want anything more. Also increasing their military.
Stopping cultural things like Dostoevsky or the Russian orchestra or ballet is ridiculous. It's asinine. It's ridiculous. It's asinine. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it doesn't make any fucking sense. So that kind of stuff doesn't really work. And yeah, the censorship that happens, I don't want to go into too long of a censorship rant, but I mean, the censorship that happens is very real. It's very apparent. People, again, I show them all the time. Like people on RT have been canceled, completely deleted. I currently, if I say anything about Russia, China, COVID, I will be censored. That is why I put the Twitch link up there, because Twitch censors me way less than YouTube. Even being on YouTube, showing a YouTube video, I get censored. So censorship happens on our language, on their language. Chinese speak Arabic. You are smoke some pot, dude. All right, everybody. I think we need to take a hit. Fucking somebody's getting a little ADD on the fucking typos here. Slow down. Smoke some pot. Smoke some pot. Chill out. Smoke some pot. Slow down. Smoke some pot. All right. It's supposed to be a chill out. Watch some news. Let's chill. Get high on our own supply, and we'll just relax. Okay, you're still going. You're still typing like 20 words a minute. Slow down. All right, let's take a little hit and keep going.
Expenses. There's joy in the Lockheed Martin headquarters, you can be certain. Also, there's joy in the ExxonMobil headquarters, because what's happening, one of the most important things that's happening, is that the slim chances of escaping disaster, catastrophe, by destroying the environment, those slim chances are being reduced, maybe eliminated. The offices of ExxonMobil, the joy is overflowing, not concealed. They've got these annoying environmentalists out of their hair. They now want to be loved, or as they put it, they want to be hugged, their work, because now they're saving civilization by increasing the production of fossil fuels and driving the world to total catastrophe. They want to be hugged for it. So there's plenty of joy in hawkish strategic circles and military production, fossil fuel circles. So why do anything to try to save Ukrainians? Why not continue to fight to the last Ukrainian?
So Noam, you are placing a lot of emphasis on what the role of the United States has been in laying the foundation for this crisis. And I want to better understand what's going on in the Putin regime. You have talked quite eloquently about the criminality of the Putin regime. I'm thinking about what Putin did to the Chechens. I'm thinking about what was done with the Russian intervention in the Syrian uprising and the brutal bombings that the Russians were engaged in and other kinds of activities. And in that sense, I see a line that goes from Chechnya to Ukraine that is not just about the role of the United States, except in insofar as perhaps competition. How do you look at that?
Chechnya was ugly, vicious, destructive, but it is within the Russian Federation.
Yeah, and I don't know, I showed a history thing a couple weeks ago, guys, that was, more about how these borders are constantly changing, constantly evolving, and it, like, like over time, when you look at if you look at a 700-year period, a 500-year period, these borders constantly move. So the way they look at it, the way we look at it, the way you're going to look at it 500 years from now, it all can be different. So history, politics.
We've got plenty of examples. Take Syria.
Mm-hmm.
In Syria, what was happening was criminal and murderous and destructive. But if we want to know the reasons, they're not obscure. The United States, France, Germany were supporting opposition forces, which by 2013, 2014 were mostly jihadi forces, which were fighting against the recognized government of Syria, the government that has a seat in the United Nations and is internationally recognized. They were trying to overthrow it. That's a Russian ally. The CIA was providing advanced weapons to the opposition forces, advanced anti-tank weapons, which did stop the Assad armies quite predictably. Didn't take a genius to predict it. I did, many other people did. The Russians reacted. They came into the war, really for the first time, moved in to destroy the CIA supplied anti-tank weapons. Then they went on to continue to support Assad's brutal, vicious effort to reconquer Syria, horrible atrocities and so on. Technically, it's not criminal. It's certainly not illegal, but it's criminal in the moral sense, not in the legal sense. Well, that's what happened in Syria. That's what happened in Syria.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we had more time, I'd like to go more into Syria, in part because...
What else he has to do? He's fucking 90. Like, he'll take any interview he can get at this moment, man. Come on. And we're going to give the guy mad respect. He has gotten some of this right still, but he is a little bit of an American war apologist, even though he does hold them to account a bit. A bit.
I don't see the... I think that one of the things that you're discounting is that there was a real uprising in Syria.
In Syria?
There was a real uprising. And that the U.S. was very ambivalent about that uprising for a while. But I more wanted to get... That could be for our next interview, no. But for this one...
Syria. There was an uprising, was part of the Arab Spring.
Right.
A democratic reformist uprising. Assad crushed it with extreme violence. That led on to the civil war, in which gradually the jihadi forces pretty much took over. You can debate the details, but by 2013, 2014, according to the most informed observers that I know, there was a largely jihadi-based opposition, which the U.S. was supporting, attempting to overthrow the government, brutal, murderous government responsible for most of the crimes, but happened to be the internationally recognized government, which was a Russian ally. Mm-hmm. So when it got to the point that the CIA was providing advanced weapons by 2015, not surprisingly, predictably, the Russians moved in to destroy them.
Really? You put weapons on somebody else's border in somebody else's ex-territory, and they're going to come in and destroy them? That's crazy. It's all just basic fucking politics, guys. It's so standard.
It went on to the rest of the destruction of Syria. Is it pretty? No, it's very ugly. Nobody believes that the Russians are saints, but they are an imperial power, minor in comparison with the United States. As I said before, as an economy, they're on a par with Italy and Spain, mm-hmm. Advanced weapons. We don't have to recall that Russia was invaded and virtually destroyed twice in the 20th century by Germany alone. Now the idea of a hostile military alliance run by the world's most powerful and indeed most aggressive state, which is providing, in last September, enhancing its strategic and defense cooperation with Ukraine with a robust and exercise program in keeping with Ukraine's status as a NATO enhanced opportunities partner. Mm-hmm. Serious threat to Russia. Translated
really
China and Mexico.
Is it really a threat? I mean, we're talking about 2022. It's not 1941.
I'm talking about 2021.
Right. Okay. Right. No. So 2021. But is it really a threat? I mean, we're not talking. There's the likelihood of a massive land assault on Russia is about as likely as my going to the moon tomorrow. This is the 21st century. We're not talking about Operation Barbarossa of 1941. And Russia has the most nuclear weapons on this planet. When we talk, I mean, one of the concerns, Noam, is that when we talk about security and this concern for Russian security, I start wondering, well, who's concerned about Ukrainian security? And who's concerned about the security of the countries that are bordering on Russia that seem to have been in a complete panic after the Soviet Union collapsed? Where does that fit in terms of some sort of more comprehensive approach to security?
Let's take a look. There was no threat whatsoever to the security of Austria, Finland, the Baltic countries, Germany. The West is now euphoric about the fact that the Russian military is incapable of capturing cities 30 kilometers from its border. There was no threat to those countries expressed or conceivable.
No threat expressed or conceivable. You know, that is just it's wild. It's wild that we're even still talking about this, guys. Um, Nobody's coming to the table with actual negotiating, and they're trying to make a war happen. This doesn't need to happen. This doesn't need to be going on. Not at all.
If you wanna, there is a threat from the United States. Why do you think world opinion regards the United States as the most dangerous country in the world? The world opinion, overwhelmingly. Nobody else is even. Okay.
Right.
There's a reason for that. The United States does what it wants. Invaded Iraq, destroyed the country, killed hundreds of thousands of people, laid the basis for ethnic conflicts that are tearing the region apart, basis for ISIS. Remember the Nuremberg Tribunal. That's not far back in history. Invasion of Afghanistan, not far back in history. The United States remains a violent power. We don't talk about it. But in the global south, they can see that the United States right now, right at this moment, is purposely, consciously enhancing some of the major criminal acts in the world right now. Right now, millions of Afghans, after 20 years of US invasion and destruction, right now, millions of Afghans are facing literal starvation. There's food in the markets. There are people who have some money, but they have to watch their children starve because they can't go to the bank to get a little bit of money to buy food in the market. Why? Because the United States has stolen their money.
Because the United States has stolen their money. We've stolen Venezuela's money. We have made living in North Korea almost unbearable, which is why I say, and I'll say it so many fucking times, it's like 80% of what I'm screaming on this show, end all sanctions. Sanctions are war. Okay? And in order for us to come to the negotiating table with Russia with any real credibility, we have to be able to end all sanctions. All of them. Open capitalism, right? We need capitalism. Oh.
But no, see, I hear you, and I'm not here.
That's just the very beginning.
I understand, but I'm not here to defend the United States, as you well know. But what I am saying is that there are multiple imperial powers on this planet, right? And one of the things about the alleged Russian fear of what was happening in the Ukraine is that up until 2014, Ukraine was not interested in getting into NATO. But when the Russians intervened in the internal affairs of Ukraine, grabbing Crimea, promoting the secessionist movements, those things changed. So all of a sudden you have then a growing sympathy, which is completely logical because the country is being torn apart.
It's not pretty, but it's very logical. You're skipping what happened in 2014. In 2014, there was a uprising or coup, call it what you want, which threw out the elected government, parliamentary government, refused the offer of the president to have a referendum or a vote, and caused him to flee the country and return the country with direct U.S. involvement. Do I have to repeat to you the leaked material about Victoria Nuland, now our point person on Ukraine, discussing secretly who we are going to work to bring to be the next president? Should it be Yachts? Should it be somebody else? Direct U.S. involvement to establish a government that would be pro-U.S. instead of the former pro-Russian government. Well, Russia could have just stood by and clapped, as we could have stood by and clapped if a pro-Chinese government was established in Mexico, calling for a military alliance with China. I rather doubt that we would have done that. You can decide. But Russia didn't do it. They moved in and supported the eastern sections, mostly Russia-oriented population, mixed population, and they moved to take Crimea for reasons that every strategic analyst understands. You want to go back to Chas Freeman? Yeah, he just described it. Every Western analyst understands it. Crimea, which incidentally is very pro-Russian, to Crimea and accepted the annexation. Crimea is the base for the only Russian warm water port. They're not like the United States.
But it was Ukrainian territory, no? It was Ukrainian territory.
What?
And with Crimea, it was Ukrainian territory from 1954 on.
Ukraine had been recently handed over to Ukraine. Traditionally, it had been Russian territory. It was the home I'm not justifying it. I'm giving the explanation that's given by every U.S. strategic analyst and high-level diplomat. Russia had its only warm water ports, including naval bases, in Crimea. They were being immediately threatened by the pro-U.S. government that took power with direct U.S. involvement. I was beginning to move towards joining slowly into preliminary moves towards NATO. So yes, Russia moved in for. You can say it was wrong, fine, but don't say it was not understandable.
No, I hear you loud and clear. But as a leftist, I'm not thinking about power politics or great power politics. I'm thinking about issues of sovereignty, self-determination. Just like when Reagan claimed that the Sandinista victory put the Sandinistas within driving distance of the Texas border, it's like we just like ridiculed that position. But let me just say this, Noam, because we have 5 minutes, and I know you have another interview. And I wanted to give you a minute before you went to your other interview. And so I wanted to thank you. I wanted to just ask you just a final quick question, which is there are many people in the US left that seem to feel that there's nothing that we can do about Putin influence one way or another, and that we should not even try. Do you have recommendations on how we in the United States, particularly the left and progressives, should be looking at what to do?
First of all, as leftists, we should be opposed to all imperialism, should be opposed to overthrowing governments, to aggression and violence. And as human beings who are sensible and moral, we should concentrate our attention, energy, and activism on what we can do. Happens overwhelmingly to be the actions of our own government, which happens to be the leader in the world champion by far in opposing sovereignty, in aggression, in violence, in interference, in terrorism, and so on. We should oppose Russian imitation of our actions. What can we do about it? Well, I think it's very clear. There are two options, the ones I mentioned before. One option is the one we're adopting: fight to the last Ukrainian, to quote Ambassador Freeman again, and ensure that the Russians that Putin and his circle are backed up against the wall, no exit, no way out. Therefore, they'll have the basic option of destroying Ukraine and moving towards global war. That's one option, happens to be the one we're following. There is another option: abandon the policies, our official policies, those I quoted, move towards accepting a status for Ukraine, which is similar to Mexico, Austria, Finland for decades. Move towards establishing that, withdraw the threats to Russia that are explicit in the policy statement I mentioned, move towards some kind of Minsk II style arrangement for a high level of autonomy for the eastern region, maybe within a federal settlement, recognize the reality that, like it or not, Crimea is off the table. It's not a negotiating option now. That's ugly, but the alternative is continue our efforts to destroy Ukraine and to move towards an international war. Those are the choices. The world is not a pretty place. You don't have the choice of electing Martin Luther King as the head of every government.
Dr. Noam Chomsky, thank you.
We don't have the choice of electing Martin Luther King as the head of every government. Fuck. We don't have anything close to that choice. This is the kind of asshole we have elected. My segue. This is the kind of asshole we have elected right here. Mitch McConnell is that kind of asshole. Here's his interview this week, streamed 3 days ago. Streamed. It was probably televised, but also streamed. Bank of America and Axios, there's some good sponsors. I'm sure he'll be
closely with leader Schumer to dramatically increase the amount of aid to Ukraine. You're largely unified in Washington, D.C., but according to a recent YouGov poll, less than half of Republican voters say it's in America's best interest to stop Russia and help Ukraine. How would you explain to those millions of GOP voters why it's in America's best interests to send billions of taxpayer dollars to Ukraine?
Well, I think the same kind of sentiment was there.
You're not going to answer this question. You're just going to bullshit around it. You're a piece of human garbage, and you give turtles a bad name. I like turtles. I don't like you. You look like a turtle. That makes me mad.
World War II. The feeling that this was a skirmish on the other side of the world. It didn't involve us.
Instantly went to World War II. Skips over Korea, Syria, Iraq, all the places that we do fucked up things. Goes instantly to World War II. Guy's garbage, man. This man is garbage.
And ultimately, it did. Out of that grew the most successful military alliance in world history, NATO, North American Treaty Organization. What was it designed to do? Margaret Thatcher said it was designed to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down.
It was designed to perpetuate war, keep the oil companies safe, and make sure we never run out of money. Which they've done very well. They've done very successfully.
And if you think about the history of NATO, it's been an enormous success. Even though one could argue Ukraine is on the other side of the NATO line, it's very, very close. And I think
God,
if
he
you look
talks
at
like a
the
fucking
history
turtle.
of Russian behavior, it's not unusual for Americans to be skeptical about any kind of foreign involvement. But I think this is a place for leaders to stand up and explain to the people why we care about this. Russia's a nuclear power. It's acting very, very similar to the way it did during the Soviet period. And we're not putting American troops there. We're helping them fight. At the risk of also making a point that probably I shouldn't have to make, there's evil in the world. America is an example and a symbol of freedom.
Can we cut that out? Can we just say there's evil in the world? America is an example. And then just cut it right there? Can I do that? How do I do that? Can we clip this and you guys try it out? Somebody clip this. See if I can clip this right.
Putting American troops there, we're helping them fight. At the risk of also making a point that probably I shouldn't have to make, there's evil in the world. America is an example and a symbol of freedom and democracy. And we're
I don't think you got that right. I don't think you got that right at all. But I'm going to try to make that a clip because that was fucking funny.
wherever we can promote that in the world, the better the world will be served. So I think we have a moral obligation, we have a strategic obligation. It is in our best interest to be helping the Ukrainians, and I think they're an inspiration to all of us. I mean, their president, the way they're putting up this fight, I mean, they basically defeated the Russian assault on the Capitol. And so I'm going to continue to advocate that this is important. But there is that sentiment. You saw 63.
I don't know if we all know this, but he is supported by, oh shit, I want to say General Dynamics. So he is supported by one of the 5 companies that make weapons. That is one of his top contributors. Go fucking figure, he's for war. Maybe it's Raytheon. I want to say General Dynamics. But yeah, he is supported by one of the massive companies. So it's weird that he's going to be supportive of us giving weapons to the Ukrainians and defending themselves. That's so odd. So odd. I can't believe it's happening. Oh, man. Come on, Mitch, you're surprising me here. Not really.
House Republicans actually vote against a resolution basically praising NATO last week, which...
I saw 6, I could get my number wrong, but something like 6 of them voted against a State Department collecting evidence of Russian war crimes. It was a heck of a vote.
Yeah, that's surprising, frankly. But I don't think the job of leaders such as myself is to echo that, but to argue with it, to confront it, to make the counterpoint of view.
What you're saying is moral leadership is important regardless of where the mood of the electorate is.
Well, I think you need to lead public opinion in different directions. I expect that most Americans wouldn't have been able to find Ukraine on a map 2 months ago. This is a development that they're now watching.
You can say that about every country that we have gone to war with when we first go to war with them. Most people probably can't tell you where Libya is still, or Syria still, or Somalia still. Just how it is. How many people can't tell you how many active shooting wars we're in. Even the freaking generals couldn't say how many active fucking wars we're in. Most people can't tell you how many active wars we're in. Guess what? It was around 9 last time I got an accurate count. 9 shooting active countries we are currently involved in.
Watching these atrocities, and all the Ukrainians are asking from us is, as my colleague Ben Sass says, well, to send them anything that will shoot.
Let's go to something else that's in the news, Leader. Ginny Thomas was texting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows after the 2020 election, discussing legal strategy with him and urging him to keep trying to overturn the election. Why should Americans feel comfortable with Justice Thomas ruling on cases related to the Trump White House's efforts to overturn the election when his wife was strategizing with the White House staff on this very issue?
Look, Justice Thomas has had a 30-year distinguished career on the Supreme Court, and nobody's questioned his standards, his ethics. The Supreme Court itself decides.
Justin Clarence Thomas, the one that had the big, long, drawn-out Anita Hill cases. No one's questioned him. Seriously? How are you going to say that shit? Are you ignorant? You were there. You've been in fucking D.C. so long, you were there. You know those. We have fucking video of you from that shit, dude. Come on.
When it's appropriate to recuse, I have total confidence, not only in Justice Thomas, but the other Supreme Court justices, to make the decision themselves as to when they should recuse from a case.
When you say no one has questioned his ethics, I mean, plenty of people have, including George W. Bush's former ethics lawyer, Richard.
Plenty of people have fucking called out. Thank you for somebody calling this asshole out. Jesus. How many times do these people get fucking interviewed and get no freaking pushback?
This was a case, particularly the January decision, his dissent on the release of Trump's White House records to the January 6th committee. Why should Americans feel confident that that was not based on a desire, which would be an understandable desire, to shield his wife's communications?
Look, Jonathan, I have, as I said, complete confidence in Justice Thomas. I've known him. I've watched him for 30 years. He's one of the historic figures of the Supreme Court. I have total confidence in his judgment about when he should sit. We're talking
but he's
about,
answerable to no one.
Look, spouses are not members of Congress.
No, but there's
or
a
not.
federal law which says if the spouse has a significant interest in the case, it says financial interest and significant interest. It's in the US code. And I know that they're answerable to no one because there's no court higher than the Supreme Court.
Hey, good luck. I don't know how much time you want to waste on this, but I have complete confidence.
Wow, what a dick move. Hey, good luck, but I don't. God, he's a dick. He's not used to pushback. He didn't want pushback. And now he's being a massive ass. Oh my goodness.
Justice Thomas to make the decision.
Leader McConnell, I've watched a lot of your interviews, and it's part of your strategy to decline to answer questions you don't want to answer, so I will move on. Leader, if Republicans take the Senate in November, as polls suggest is very likely, and a Supreme Court seat opens up next year, 2023, not an election year, can you make a commitment for the American public here today that you will at least hold hearings on President Biden's nominee?
Most hypotheticals I don't answer, and I think that whole question puts the cart before the horse.
How is he still a fucking politician? Who keeps electing this asshole? Seriously. Who keeps electing this asshole? Do I need to move to fucking Kentucky and vote this guy out?
Really get into the majority as a result of this year's election. What I can tell you for sure, if the House and Senate are Republican next year, the president will finally be the moderate he campaigned as. Finally, be the moderate he campaigned as. And we'll look for...
You think Biden is a radical socialist, which discredits anything you fucking say because you're an idiot. If you think Biden is a radical socialist, you're a moron. There. Or you're a lying asshole. Both. I'm going to go with both.
If you want to think about an American football field, think of trying to accomplish things between the 40-yard lines where you can reach agreement. A good example in the current Congress was infrastructure, postal reform. I'll be interested in working with the president when he's willing to be a moderate. But with regard to personnel and the other things that we're involved in, I'm not going to signal how we're going to approach it.
Respectfully, it's a big deal that you won't answer this question because, you know, in 2016 you made what you called a principled argument for not holding hearings on President Obama's Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland. You said it was the most important thing you ever did in your career, most consequential. The argument you made was it was an election year and we should give the voters an opportunity to weigh in and let the next president select it. Are you suggesting that you are developing an argument for not holding hearings on a Supreme Court nominee if it's not an election year?
I'm suggesting that I'm not going to answer your question.
I mean, I think it's an important question in the public.
This guy is a jackass. Who keeps fucking electing him? Who?
I think people, like, before, don't you think the public before the November elections has a right to know how you would approach such a weighty topic?
I choose not to answer the question.
You decline to answer? We'll move on. Leader, you are known for playing a ruthless style of politics. Where do you draw your moral red lines?
I didn't realize I was known for playing a ruthless thing. I thought my wife thinks I'm a really nice guy. My kids like me.
That's a jackass fucking comment. My wife and kids think I'm a really nice guy. Fucking everybody says that. Everybody can say that because you're nice to those people. How's the fucking server? How's your fucking interns? How do those people think about you?
I got a lot of friends.
4 so far, okay.
I have a lot of friends. Oh, he's a bad person. He's a bad person. Who keeps voting this asshole in?
I'm shocked to hear such a comment.
Let's just take as a premise, and I think the audience might agree with me, that there are some people, maybe some substantial people in this country who might agree with that assertion.
I'm sure you could find
So
some who could.
moral red lines, where do you draw them?
I'm perfectly comfortable with the way I have conducted my political career, and I'd be happy to respond to any specificity you want to apply to the term. What was it?
Moral red lines.
Moral red line. Yeah.
Well, let me
I'm
give you-
very comfortable with my moral red line.
Let me give you...
Oh my god. Dude, he asked the question 3 fucking times. You had to ask the term. You had, what do you call it? Lettuce? Fucking Jesus Christ, dude.
one specific. Help me understand this. I watched your speech last year in February on the Senate floor after the second impeachment vote on Donald Trump, and it was an extraordinary speech. You spoke very powerfully against the most powerful figure in your party, the president, and you said Donald Trump's actions preceding the January 6th insurrection were a, quote, disgraceful dereliction of duty, and that he was practically and morally responsible, your words, for provoking the events of that day. How do you go from saying that to 2 weeks later saying you'd absolutely support Donald Trump if he's the Republican nominee in 2024?
Well, as the Republican leader of the Senate, it should not be a front-page headline that I will support the Republican nominee for president.
After you've said that about him, I think it's astonishing.
I think I have an obligation to support the nominee of my party, and
is there anything they could do?
I will. That will mean that whoever the nominee is has gone out and earned the nomination.
Okay, but Donald Trump earned it last time, and I'm just trying to understand, you know, what you say matters. You're a very important voice in this country. You're the leader of your party, and you seem to hold two concurrent, conflicted positions, which is
not at all inconsistent. Not at all inconsistent. I stand by everything I said on
I understand, but
January 6th and everything I said on February the 13th.
I understand that, but what I want to understand, which I haven't heard you address, is
because I don't get to pick the Republican nominee for president. They're elected by the Republican voters all over the country.
I fully understand that, but take Liz Cheney, for example.
You want to spend some more time on this as well?
I actually do, because I actually, no, I genuinely want to understand this. I really want to understand how you think about this, because Liz Cheney, who had...
You want to spend some more time on this too? This guy is something else, man. He wants to avoid everything. I don't believe he's had a debate in like 20 years. He hasn't had a primary in like 30 years. Like, this guy is something else. Unbelievable what the corruption and power does. In both parties. If anybody hasn't heard me talk before, in both fucking parties. I have equal amounts of hate for the corruption of both parties.
The same view of January 6th. She said she doesn't want Donald Trump anywhere near the White House, and she's going to work to not make that happen because she thinks that there are some things more important than party loyalty.
Yeah. Well, maybe you ought to be talking to Liz Cheney.
No, but I'm not trying to... I really, it's not a gotcha. I'm just actually trying to understand, like, is there any threshold for you of what someone can do on a moral level?
I say many things I'm sure people don't understand. And
Okay.
Wow.
Leader McConnell, your National Republican...
This is fucking horrible. This is really bad. He is not making a good cause for being a good representative.
has built its entire email messaging to voters around Donald Trump. My Axios colleague received 143 fundraising emails from the NRSC sent in March. 137 of them mentioned Trump by name. The NRSC is inundating voters with messages about how they need to stick with Trump, be loyal to Trump, sign up for Trump's new social network, a private business. If his actions before the January 6th committee, the January 6th constituted disgraceful dereliction of duty, why are you so comfortable with fundraising off his name?
Well, I'm not the chair of the NRSC. That'd be a good question to ask him. But
Some influence, maybe.
Generally speaking, direct mail is designed to raise money. And I think it's no secret the president, former president, has a lot of grassroots support across the country. And my assumption is those appeals are designed to raise money. That's what the Senatorial Committee does. And the president, former president, has a lot of grassroots support. No question about it.
So it's political expediency.
Their job is to raise money. And my assumption is these appeals are crafted in such a way to raise small dollar dollars.
They certainly raise money, there's no question. Let's talk about the midterm elections, and I specifically want to discuss strategy first. You've talked about the importance of having electable nominees. What does that mean to you?
Well, what it means is, if you look at where the Senate majority will lie, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Ohio, Missouri, Nevada, Arizona, almost all of those states are competitive in November. And we've had difficulty in the suburbs the last few years. I'm looking for candidates who can appeal to suburban voters and actually win in November. And so it's a value judgment. You look at the primary choices, poll data, background, appeal, and we had a couple of cycles where the attitude was, don't get involved in primaries. So I always like to mention to people, 4 folks you may have forgotten: Sharon Angle, Todd Aiken, Richard Murdoch,
Christine
O'Donnell.
The fourth I forget, because I'm not actually that invested in my answer.
The witch?
I'm not
no,
a witch.
She's not a witch, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say after 2010 and 2012, I concluded we need to change the business model. And by that I meant not so much a philosophical litmus test, or in this era, whether you do or don't like Donald Trump, but can you appeal to a general election audience? So your next question is going to be, how are we doing? And the primary season is just beginning. And I'm pretty optimistic we're going to have what I would consider a fully electable nominee in every one of those states.
Well, you gave me 4 names. I have a few names for you.
Of course he does.
And I want to start with Eric Greitens, a candidate polls indicate could be your GOP nominee in Missouri. Greitens said, quote, "I want to tell you directly, Karl Rove and Mitch McConnell, hear me now. You are disgusting cowards, and we are coming for you. We are no longer going to allow you, not just to attack me and my kids, but to destroy this country." Is this the sort of electability that you're looking for, Leader McConnell?
Yeah, I don't have any comment about that.
I mean, mind you, this is a man accused of tying a woman up, blindfolding her, taking nude photographs of her for the purposes of blackmail, then coercing her into sexual acts. Do you think he's electable?
I think the voters in the Missouri primary will take all of that into account.
It's a lot to take into account. Let's talk about a candidate you have talked about, Herschel Walker, the leading GOP candidate in the vital Senate race in Georgia. You endorsed him, yet his ex-wife says he pointed a pistol at her head and said, "I'm going to blow your effing brains out." And an ex-girlfriend has accused him of threatening her life. Why is he a suitable candidate?
Herschel Walker has addressed that issue repeatedly over the last 10 years. I think
It's a heck of an issue.
well, he admitted he had some troubles in his life. He's been an exemplary citizen in recent years. He's a hero in Georgia. Almost every candidate's had troubled periods.
I mean, I don't know that almost every candidate has pointed.
Look, I don't want to argue with it. I think Walker is completely electable. He's actually ahead at the beginning of this race, and we're fully behind him.
How did you, absorbing those
I don't
very
wanna
troubling
argue.
allegations, talk me through your process for...
I don't want to discuss my opinion. It's my opinion. I believe it. We're going with it. Fuck you. Shut up. Move on. That's this guy's way of fucking talking. This is his way of interviewing. He is a massive prick.
I'm to the conclusion that you could put your name, Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, well, I did that, and I've endorsed him.
But how?
How?
Yeah, because one of your top operatives on the outside, Josh Holmes, when the first story came out with all this, he said, "Oh, I've never seen this is terrible." How did you go from, I assume you had a similar, maybe you didn't, maybe you thought it was fine, but I doubt you did. How did you come from that to supporting him?
The way I always do, a variety of different considerations. Every candidate has flaws and assets. This candidate has a lot of assets and is very competitive and has a great chance of winning.
You're the most powerful elected Republican.
Great chance of winning, very electable. Didn't say anything about the fact that he might be a crazy asshole, abuses women. Just very electable, has a chance of winning. Because that's what he cares about. It's winning seats, having people that he can control, and then that way the red game looks a little better than the blue game, and then they're all on the same corporate crap anyway, and it's all fucking facade. And this guy's a liar, man. He's horrible.
In Washington, D.C., and despite all the BS I hear around, there's no obvious challenger to your leadership. People like to gin it up, but there isn't. And yet recent polls show your approval rating is in the 30s among Republicans, not Democrats, Republicans. Why do they hate you?
Look, there are two constituents that are important to doing this job. People of Kentucky who've sent me here 7 times, and the Republican members of the Senate who've elected me 8 times without opposition. I'm proud of that. My job is not to run up political popularity nationally. I'm not running for anything nationally. And when you are running one of the parties, you end up making people irritated. 100% of the opposition doesn't like you. And you have to make decisions between factions at various times. And frequently you don't have that great of support internally. So, as I said, the two constituents that matter to me are the people at home and the people in the Senate.
But do you have a theory about, because it sounds like part of your theory is it's the cost of leadership. Being in leadership is not a popularity contest, and you take decisions that can, be compromises. It's an ugly business sometimes. But it doesn't make sense to me because I was looking at Schumer and Pelosi's polling among Democrats, and they're extremely popular. Pelosi was 67%, Schumer was 57%, you're 36% among Republicans. Do you have a theory as to why that is?
No, it's just the price of leadership.
They're the leaders of the party.
Well, if I had a theory about it, I wasn't going to sit here and discuss it with you, Jonathan.
Jesus, dude. I'm not going to talk to you about it. I don't want to talk to you about it. Mitch McConnell is a massive asshole. Why did he go on the interviews just going to be a dick the whole time? Like, why even go in and do this?
Okay.
Okay.
Leader McConnell, let's go to an issue that's now very much live and dangerous in your party, the fate of Liz Cheney. You told Politico last February the future of the party will be determined in places like Wyoming in 2022. The future of the party will be determined in places like Wyoming in 2022. What did you mean by that? It seems like you felt like there was something larger at stake for the party in the Liz Cheney race.
Well, I think I was probably mentioning Lisa Murkowski, too, who is also a member of the Senate.
Who Trump's opposing.
Yeah, and I think it's important for Lisa to be reelected. She's one of the few sort of moderates in the middle in the Senate, is a key player in advancing bipartisan legislation. We're going to do everything we can to make sure she's successful.
But Cheney, will you do anything to help her? Trump is raising millions of dollars.
Well, I've contributed to Liz Cheney, yeah.
Do you plan to, hold fundraisers or anything like that for her campaign?
Look, I'm focusing on the Senate.
Okay. Leader McConnell, what will be the Senate Republican policy agenda should you win back the majority? What will be your top legislative priorities?
We're going to address the issues that are front and center of the American people. Inflation.
Tax the rich.
The border.
Borders are imaginary lines drawn, and they're fluid. And you're really talking about Mexico. You're not actually talking about rich white elitists that move their people in here all the time and buy up property, making it harder for us to own homes, such as in big cities where Chinese, Russian oligarchs own massive amounts of property, and then that jacks up prices for regular people. You're not talking about that, though, right?
Crime.
Ooh, crime. That's a economic thing. And because people don't have good jobs, can't afford shit, they get more stressed out and have to take things out. So your shitty rich person policies have caused crime.
The things that are front and center for the American people are the things that I think we ought to address. But we ought not to claim we can succeed in doing things exactly the way we would do them with a Democrat in the White House. So it'll be a combination of
making those things worse and blocking everything. That's all you fucking do when you have control of shit.
And some cooperation, because there are things that need to be done for the American people when you have a time of divided government. And in fact, I negotiated 3 major deals with Joe Biden while he was vice president during the Obama years, things that we had to address. And that's going to be, I think, pretty clearly the approach of Senate Republicans next year.
But those are still very broad categories. Is there any specifics you can share with us about what legislation you would try to promote, even one idea, policy idea, if you win back the majority?
We're going to do everything we can to push this administration into domestic energy production. One of the things we've observed here in the Ukraine war is the president seems to want everybody in the world to produce more except us. The policies in terms of making it difficult for domestic energy production have been outrageous under this administration. We were actually an exporter of oil and gas in 2019. We've gone just like that.
Actually, I looked at the figures. We're still, depending on the month, a net export. It's very close to net export. It's not actually a huge drop.
I think the policies have been totally different. And so, admittedly, he's going to push back on those, but it'll be more difficult for him to get some people confirmed, for example, to some of these agencies.
Like a Supreme Court justice.
Or these agencies, yeah.
The reason I'm asking is in December we reported you told donors
I'm going to block the shit out of them.
You didn't want to release a detailed legislative agenda before the midterms. It was more important to focus on attacking Democrats and Joe Biden.
Yeah, because the election is going to be a referendum on how people feel about this entirely Democratic government.
Oh, yeah, we're well more than two-thirds away.
They're going to express themselves, in all likelihood, pretty aggressively about how they feel about this administration.
Let's stay with politics.
Tell them, like people like Kevin McCarthy and Rick Scott believe you owe it to voters to show what
Antony Blinken had a short interview that I thought we should check out. Blinken, when you see these images, you ask yourself, what if this was happening in my town? I don't really care what the actual interview is about. It's Antony Blinken for 10 minutes to take a break from that douche. God, I hate Mitch McConnell.
This will likely last years, this war. A protracted war is going to last years, according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Will today's new commitment of javelins, anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, shorten that timeline?
Andrew, we want to see this come to an end as quickly as possible, and that's exactly why we're making sure that we're doing everything we can to support Ukraine and to give them the assistance that they need to put pressure and to increase pressure on Russia, even as we're strengthening the defenses of our NATO alliance.
So what about the javelins?
So the javelins, we just the president authorized another $100 million in a drawdown that will provide more javelins to our Ukrainian partners. Put this in perspective. Between the United States and other allies and partners, for every Russian tank in Ukraine, we have provided or will soon provide 10 anti-tank systems, 10 for every single Russian tank. So in terms of what they need to act quickly and act effectively, to deal with the planes that are firing at them from the skies, the tanks that are trying to destroy their cities from the ground, they have the tools that they need. They're going to keep getting them, and we're going to keep sustaining that. But to the chairman's point, and the president said this as well, as much as we want to see this come to an end as soon as possible to stop the death and destruction that's being wrought by Russia and Ukraine, there is also a very likely scenario by which this goes on for some time. The Russians, even as they're moving their forces, they've retreated from Kyiv, they've retreated from the north and the west. They're consolidating forces in the east, in the Donbass. They have a lot of force still left. The Ukrainians have something else that's ultimately stronger, and that is a fierce determination and will to defend their country with the support of many countries around the world.
Can they win?
So ultimately, yes, because what is success?
So ultimately, hesitation, yes. Because he needs a couple seconds to think of how he can answer this while knowing possibly what the future entails. Which is not a true victory in any shape or form. It's devastation, it's ongoing death. Where two leaders could sit down and talk and have this over in an hour. They want war, people. They want war.
What is victory? It's holding on to the sovereignty and independence of their country. And there is no scenario by which, over time, that will not happen. The problem is it may take time. And in the meantime, tremendous death and destruction. But what is so powerful here is that the Ukrainians have made it very clear that they will not subjugate themselves to Vladimir Putin's will.
But no matter how much we give them, how can Ukraine ever last against Russia for the long term unless the U.S. and other countries guarantee its borders, its safety, as President Zelensky wants?
Well, first things first. The first thing is to see that this aggression by Russia comes to an end, that there is a ceasefire, that Russia withdraws its forces, that Ukraine asserts its sovereignty and its independence. But then, yes, we have to do things to make sure that, to the best of our ability and Ukraine's ability, this can't happen again, that Russia is deterred, that Ukraine is defended. We're having constant conversations.
Will we guarantee that? Will the U.S. get more involved?
We're having constant conversations with our Ukrainian partners, pretty much on a daily basis, including about what it is we and others could do.
So this is a different tactic. Instead of answering the question, you're just continue with your point. It's a very different tactic than just being a dick. Still kind of dickish, but not as dickish as McConnell. Less dick.
In the event of a successful negotiation, to defend them and help them defend themselves going forward. All of this is the subject of conversations right now. I'm not going to get ahead of that, but we're going to do everything we can. Others will do what they can to make sure that Ukraine can defend itself and deter aggression being repeated by Russia.
President Putin has said he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, the glory of the Soviet Union. With those ambitions, how can Ukraine ever be safe as long as Putin's in power?
Well, two things. First, in terms of what Russia set out to do, what Putin set out to do in Ukraine, this has already been a strategic setback, if not a failure. Because keep in mind, Andrea, the goal that Putin set, in his own words, was to eliminate Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. He sees it as a state that doesn't deserve to be independent, that needs to be subsumed back into some kind of greater Russia. That is not happening. Not just the retreat from Kyiv, but the fact that no matter how you play this out, the Ukrainians are not going to subject themselves to a Russian dictatorship.
He's more popular than ever at home.
So he may be, for now, more popular. Of course, if you were getting fed a steady diet, morning, noon, and night of propaganda, which
unfortunately we are, unfortunately most nations are, it's literally what you guys fucking put in like Rule 101 of CIA secret ops.
Unfortunately, the Russian people are. That speaks to what popularity he has. At the same time, when people are responding to polls, they may be very much afraid of giving a truthful answer. There's now a 15-year criminal penalty for anyone who in any way opposes the so-called special military operation. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. Having said that, I think there is a real fundamental problem, which is the Russians don't get the factual information that they need to make judgments for themselves. And that's because of a system that Vladimir Putin has perfected, in which that information is denied them.
President Biden has called Putin a butcher, a war criminal. You have said that
a torture and a war criminal. Huh. Name a president who doesn't have those credentials. Name one. Just one. I'll wait. They'd be waiting a while.
People responsible for the crimes in Bucha and those who ordered them will be held accountable.
That's right.
How can that happen without Vladimir Putin standing trial?
I recommend Nature Made vitamins because I trust their quality. They were the.
Well, we watched like a 50-minute. Ooh. We get like a 50-minute YouTube video on Chomsky and no commercials. We watched 8 minutes of USA Today or MSNBC and commercials.
Ability can move slowly, but they move. And someday, some way, somewhere, those who committed these crimes and those who ordered the crimes will be held accountable. But it takes time, and part of this is building the case. Part of this is, which we're doing, and others are doing. There's a Ukrainian special prosecutor who is working on this. We're supporting her efforts. We set up at the United Nations, at the Human Rights Council, a commission of inquiry that's looking into this as well. We're supporting those efforts, building the case, getting the evidence, documenting it.
Yeah, Biden's not trying to fucking. They want war. Biden's not trying to do anything here. Um, they're not coming to negotiation tables. And Biden's not really the person that should negotiate anyway. He's fucking out of it. But they're not trying to negotiate right now. They're just trying to bomb. They're trying to sell some weapons. So they're doing exactly what they want to right now. This guy's he's just a different way of lying, I think.
The International Criminal Court is looking at this too. But all of this will play out over time, and we have to build the case. We have to get the evidence. We have to document it. We're
What's up,
doing all of
Viceroy?
that. So, is that next
Viceroy
month,
Xerxes
next
back.
year, in 5 years? It could take time, but I think I can guarantee you there will be a relentless effort to make sure that those responsible for what we're seeing are held accountable. And what we're seeing, Andrea, is, I think, beyond what any of us even could fully anticipate. We said before Russia committed this aggression that there would be atrocities, that it was a deliberate part of their campaign. And even knowing that, when this Russian tide receded from Bucha, and we saw the death and destruction left in its wake, and we saw what that looked like, including people who had been assassinated, in effect, their hands tied behind, executed, their hands tied behind their backs, the abuse committed against women, against children. It's horrific, and there has to be accountability for it.
Did you see the video that President Zelensky provided to the United Nations, or other images from Bucha, as you describe it, the atrocities? You have small children. What do you tell your children? What would you tell them?
Well, thankfully, they're too small to actually see that, be able to digest it.
But someday they will know.
But someday they will. And I have to tell you, Andrea, I think, and I suspect most of us have the same reaction, especially those of us who have children or even small children. You put yourself in the shoes of the father, the mother, the grandfather, the grandmother, who's in the middle of this.
Has he ever put himself in the fucking shoes of anybody in Yemen? Anybody in Palestine? Anybody in any of the places that we're constantly bombing? This guy's a dick. I wasn't expecting much from this, but there I go. I get what I expect. Here's another thing that's going to make me mad. Interview Sunday. No good interviews. All just horribleness. I'm done with this one.
Good evening.
BLinkin
It
sucks.
is an...
All right. Views from the Kremlin. Full interview with Putin Spokesman with Sky News. Sky News being like the Fox News of Britain, if you don't know. They're essentially their Fox News. With BBC being their CNN, I guess. I don't know.
Of aggression condemned as a barbaric attack on an independent democratic country. Cities have been bombarded, towns devastated, and countless lives.
Again, I'm anti-war here, but I don't think anybody is trying to stop this war at the moment. I'm quite sure that both Biden and Putin are trying to elongate it. They're trying to use weapons. They're trying to make this skirmish last for a while. And it's good for the stress economy. It's good for distraction. So I don't think anybody's looking for peace right now. And pretending that one side or the other, the NATO side or the NATO/US side or the Russian side want peace is just completely bullshit. Both sides are to blame.
Have been lost, and now growing evidence of war crimes is emerging. Evidence dismissed by Russia as a sham. Tonight, in his first British broadcast interview since the war began, I speak to the man who does much of the talking for Vladimir Putin, his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. He joins me live from his office in Moscow. And thank you very much for being with us. First of all, do you accept that the first weeks of this invasion have not gone according to plan for President Putin?
Well, first of all, I would rather disagree with your qualification of what is going on. You didn't mention...
Yeah, first of all, he's not going to fit your fucking narrative, dude. That's so basic. Come on, man. I love the, just, come on. You know he's not going to go straight to your narrative.
The qualification of special military operation. And you didn't say a word about the reasons for the special military operation.
Because it's a war, isn't it? It's not a special military operation. It is a full-scale, illegal war.
It's a very serious operation with quite heavy consequences. Yes. I would like to start with the reason of this operation. Actually, it's very important to remind you. 2014. This is the year when the legal history of Ukraine was changed during an illegal coup, and after that, Ukraine has started to become an anti-Russian center. Everything that occurred in Ukraine was aimed against our country. And during the last couple of decades, actually, we were concerned about our security. NATO, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, started to move towards our boundaries.
Yeah.
And we were really nervous about that.
But Ukraine, let's be honest about this. Ukraine posed no threat to Russia, and NATO is a defensive organization that also poses no threat to Russia. And just
whoa, okay, that's bullshit. NATO poses no threat to Russia. That's just asinine. Who is this guy?
My point at the beginning was that you have retreated. The reason I said it's not going to plan is you've retreated from the capital. President Zelensky is still in power. You've lost thousands of troops. You've lost 6 generals, hundreds of tanks and other equipment. It's a humiliation, really, isn't it?
No. It's a wrong understanding of what is going on.
Well, what is wrong about what I've just said?
They're tactically removing Ukraine military and taking out Ukrainian army holdings, especially in the Donbass and the Donetsk regions, because that's where Russians were getting bombarded by Ukrainian Nazis for the last 8 years. There's no fucking history with these people. They don't try to give any freaking, understanding of stuff. Like, where's your history? Where's your facts?
Nearly everything.
Well, but you've lost thousands of troops. Yeah, let's go through it. You've lost thousands of troops. How many troops have you lost?
We have significant losses of troops, and it's a huge tragedy for us. Now, about 2 regions, Kiev and the Chernigov regions. So actually, the troops were really withdrawn.
Cannon fodder. Ukrainians and Russian troops are cannon fodder, so that way we can get rid of some missiles in a conflict that helps the 2 biggest weapon producers on the planet, Russia and USA. We make the most weapons on the planet. We need to get rid of weapons. Let's have a skirmish. That's what I see this as. This is fucking a way just to abstract money for the oil companies and the weapons companies. Oh wait, they're the same companies. Oil companies and weapon companies are usually the same board members, same families own them, blah, blah, blah. Jesus.
As an act of a goodwill during the negotiations between 2 delegations, Russian and Ukrainian delegation. And it was an act of a goodwill just to lift tension from those regions, and in order to show that Russia is really ready to create comfortable conditions for continuation of negotiations.
But it's just not true, is it? Because you continued. If it was a measure of goodwill, why then did you continue to bombard Mariupol in the way that you have, to devastate that city? If you really wanted to facilitate peace talks, you would have had a ceasefire. But you carried on bombarding Mariupol and shelling Kharkiv and other places. So it's not really true, is it?
If you let me, I'll try to explain. Well, first of all, Mariupol is a part of Lugansk People's Republic. We recognize them as an independent state. And actually, the premier goal of the operation was to assist those people of 2 people's republics that were suffering for 8 years from heavy shelling from Ukrainian military people. And by the way, during those 8 years, no one would mention that, would mention those atrocities.
But no one in Europe and
no one in Great Britain.
Even if it was true, that doesn't justify a full-scale invasion, does it? I mean, let's keep this in proportion. I mean, are you determined? You mentioned Mariupol is part of Ukraine. Are you determined to take Mariupol, whatever the human cost, whatever the cost in civilian life?
Mariupol is going to be liberated from nationalistic battalions. And we hope it will happen sooner than later.
So liberation, you describe it as liberation. So the pounding of Mariupol, the pounding of civilian buildings, the pounding of a hospital, that's liberation, is it?
Well, hospital was a fake. Hospital was a fake, and we have very serious reasons to believe that it was a fake, and we insist on that. This is number one. Number two.
Well, let me just say, you did say that one of the famous photograph, or infamous photograph, of a woman on a stretcher, which you said you said she was an actor. She turned out, a doctor told us later, to have died.
Staged.
She told us she died. So let's not talk about that. I mean, how many civilians, let me ask you this, how many civilians do you think have died in Ukraine so far?
Too many. That's the answer. Too many. How many civilians have died in wars that the British Empire is currently involved in? Too many. That's also the fucking answer. Hypocrisy knows no bounds, people.
I don't want to operate any figures that are not confirmed or double confirmed. We have to be very careful. We have to be very careful in pronouncing any figures, because we're living in during a days of fakes and lies.
Well, let me tell you this.
That we meet every day.
Let me tell you this. So your UN ambassador has said there are no credible reports of civilian casualties. And as regards Bucha, according to your Ministry of Defence on April the 3rd, and I quote, not a single local resident has suffered from any violent action while Russia was in control. I mean, do you really expect the world to believe that?
We insist on that. We insist on that, and we insist that the whole situation, the situation is Bucha, is a well-staged insinuation, nothing else.
So let me just show you.
And those poor people, and we're seeing dead bodies there.
Yeah.
And those dead bodies there were not victims of Russian military personnel.
You see, this is astonishing.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few sources myself, that they had staged bodies for Mariupol.
For you to talk like this. Let me just show you this satellite image from Bucha on the outskirts of Kiev. And this is an image taken on the 28th of February. We have geolocated it to Yablonska Street in Bucha before Russia had control of the area. It's a normal-looking street. Let's compare it to an image of the exact same location on the 19th of March, just a couple of days after Russia had taken control of the area. And now you see the shadows, bodies strewn along the street. And we know their bodies from this video.
Pictures. We know those Maxar's pictures.
No, but we know their bodies from this video released, I'm showing now, on social media on the 1st of April, which we've geolocated as well. We have blurred the bodies for viewers. And you can see this body is in the same place as the one seen in the satellite image. The body hasn't moved. The car drives along further. You can see, stops at 2 more bodies, again matching the position of the ones in that satellite image. And so it continues with everybody on the street. And you maintain that all this was staged. You're talking about a fake. This shows that dead bodies appeared while you control the area. Russian troops killed those people, didn't they?
He just said no, you're going to make them... Oh, my God. It's such a jackass way to say it. Oh, fucking Western media has no nuance. And we don't know how to practice it because we're always right. And that's how he's acting. He's like, he's acting like I'm right. And, yeah. Just fucking admit it, man. Just admit you're wrong. Russia's evil. Russia's wrong. NATO's wrong. US is wrong. We're all fucking wrong. You're wrong. Yes. Yeah. We're all killing too many civilians. All these governments are killing too many civilians.
Or to 30 minutes, I will explain step by step why it all fakes. If you have this additional time, let's go on. I will tell you.
Yeah, well, you're saying it's fake, so there's not much point going on. But we've verified it. We've geolocated it. We've got the dates from the satellite imagery company.
We know pretty well the company that has supplied international community with these satellite pictures. This is Maxar company that is in a very tight cooperation with the Pentagon. And it's interesting. It's interesting to know, and you would probably be interesting to know that they don't have actually exact dates on their footage, on their satellite images.
I've been saying this for like fucking 5 years. Everything should be time-stamped. Like, any footage should have timestamps, day stamps, so we know that it's actually from that date. Video footage needs to have timestamps, so like GPS stamps of some sort. Because they're always using footage of, like, Libya to show Syria. Or they use footage from the fucking first Gulf War to show fucking, Iran or some shit. Like, they constantly fuck with the footage to present their narrative. Yeah, the Western media, they push their narrative with just crap, and yeah, they're they're like elitist. Like they're like, I'm right. Why are you like why aren't you answering the like? It's just the way they ask their questions, man. Like you're not a better person than this person. You're not. You seem like an asshole, actually. And maybe you should. I mean, of course, this guy's lying for government too. So I think any spokesman for a government is usually trying to lie as well. But you're not letting him. Like you're asking accusatorially. You're not presenting questions. You're presenting accusations.
So it's impossible to allocate an exact date of those satellite pictures.
Okay, let's have a look at this.
We still insist that those pictures were made after Russian troops were withdrawn from that area.
Okay, well, what about this one then? Because our team has also verified this next video to early March in the same area of Bucha. And here we see a woman with a bike, named today as Irina Filkina, walking along Yablonska Street when Russian troops were in control. Around the corner is an armoured vehicle identified by our team as a Russian military vehicle. So the Russians are there. You can see the vehicle fire a shot which creates a plume of smoke exactly where Irina was standing with her bike. Now, if I could just finish, Ms. Best, sorry. After the Russians had withdrawn, this video, geolocated to the exact same spot, showed Irina lying dead on the ground. So there can be no real doubt, surely, that this...
Yeah, didn't, from what I know, they got rid of all the evidence, and the Russians immediately asked for a neutral instigation or investigation. Like they instantly asked for a neutral investigation, and then yeah, it was completely just gone. Same thing in Syria, by the way. Syria gas tax. They wanted a neutral investigation. Syria asked for it, and then they discredited the only people that showed up and actually checked out the scene in person. So yeah, they don't when they want something to be the narrative, they don't let you actually.
Shows Russian troops killing a civilian.
Yeah.
It's right there on film.
I'll appreciate if you could be more specific. How could you exactly identify the Russian tank or whatever, what was standing? Why do you think it was Russian?
Okay, well, I think we got a still that shows the Russian tank. You can see, if you look at that, you can see the V marking clearly on the side.
Yeah, but those are not the tanks that were shooting.
That suggests
different position.
They are the exact same armored vehicles that were on that street. I mean, look, we've verified it.
What you're showing right now are not the exact tank that was shooting. You have to be very careful. You have to be very careful in what you are showing, just not to repeat.
It's exactly the same armored vehicle. I mean, so you deny that happened. You're denying it's happened, and you're saying it's being faked. Basically, it's some sort of conspiracy. Is that right?
We deny that Russian military can have something in common with these atrocities and with dead bodies that were shown on the streets of Bucha.
So let's just be clear here. What you're saying to the world,
You expected something else, you moron? Like, you not know what his answers were going to be when you came in? You didn't know what the Russian policy was, and you didn't know how to counter it? You're just going to act like, what you're saying is, I'm just completely blindsided by the fact that you're denying the things that Western media has been putting out for the last couple days, and independent media has been debunking for the last few days.
Saying to Ukrainians, what you're saying to, let's face it, the relatives of those victims that we've just seen there, and what you're saying to Russians, your own people, is that this is fabricated, it is fake, and that it's some sort of huge conspiracy, a propaganda stunt. I mean,
Good point.
Do you realize?
Yeah, good point. How the fuck would you know if it was... So, yeah, it's Russian military. It looks like it's Russian design, right? Well, yeah, because Ukraine is, like, literally ex-Soviet. So they're going to have ex-Soviet shit. They've probably been buying weapons from the Soviets since then. Like, like 30% of Ukrainians speak Russian? Like, a third of them have Russian descent? It's just... Yeah. I don't think the British anchor is doing so well against the Russian enemy. I don't think he's doing so good. He seems to be losing this discussion.
How grotesque that sounds.
Well, it's not a conspiracy, actually. It's a bold fake. It's a bold fake, and we've been speaking about that for a couple of days, but no one would listen to us. We've been presenting very detailed explanations on very various internet resources. If you're interested in that, we'll provide you with those internet resources.
But to say it's a fake, you're suggesting it's a conspiracy between satellite imagery companies, between Ukrainians, between all the Western media. I mean, you're suggesting it is a conspiracy. It's exactly what you're saying.
Well, of course, it can be a play of fate. It can be a play of lies.
Okay.
You can attach any date to a picture that was made through satellite.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they got just all this fucking shit that they show. You never know when it's from. And it was like literally proven that they were showing shit from Libya and showing it as Syria. They were showing shit from, like, what was it, a video game to prove, like, so, like they were showing video game footage to try to fucking show the Russian attack. It's fucking weak, man.
Okay, well, what about...
Well, we have to doubt sometimes. I mean, you cannot be without any investigation.
But you doubt all the
You
time.
cannot be so sure of blaming everything on Russia.
Well, let me put this to you then. Human Rights Watch, the organization, they've already documented hundreds of apparent war crimes. And these include, I've got it here, repeated rape of a woman in front of her child after her husband was killed. Other cases of rape, 2 cases of summary execution, 1 of 6 men, the other of 1 man. Other cases of torture, unlawful violence, threats against civilians. I've got the dates, I've got the witness statements. We can go through it if you want. But these are documented killings with witness evidence and corroborated, by the way, today by Amnesty International. And we've yet to discover what's happening in Mariupol. I mean, don't you see it's just preposterous to sort of issue a blanket denial of all these things?
It should all be very thoroughly investigated. I agree with you. But at the same time, we have even the bigger amount of eyewitnesses and people who took part in these various situations in Mariupol, in Bucha, and other towns of Ukraine. They were telling us the terrible stories of those nationalistic battalion military people, torturing people, not letting them leave the town, not letting them go out of the town, flee the town. So we also have these eyewitnesses.
So, I mean...
But you don't want to listen to them,
No,
to those
but we do. We've just been carrying a story this afternoon about claims of Ukrainian war. I spoke to the chief prosecutor of Ukraine on this program the other day, and she said that all war crimes would be investigated and all the evidence would be passed on to the International Criminal Court. The difference is one...
We are interested. We are interested in investigating everything.
But the difference
is... We also collect evidence and proofs for crimes that were committed by nationalistic battalions.
But the difference is one of scale, but it is also that they are agreeing to investigate. You are saying it is not true, it is a fake, before you've even investigated.
Well, we have to say that it's not true because we're hearing that everything is blamed on Russia. And we completely disagree with that. And by the way, I would have a humble suggestion. If you make a story about crimes in Ukraine, and if you speak to Ukrainian prosecutor general, why don't you speak to Russian prosecutor general to make an objective picture, to present 2 sides?
We'd love to do that. We will do that. Let's just suppose then that you are, what you are saying is right and that your troops have not committed these crimes. Will you presumably...
Yeah, cutting the internet access. I was thinking about that the other day. Like Ukraine, there's an American who's been living in the Donbass since 2014-13 area, and he was live streaming from his phone. He was he had an interview. He was like fucking zooming from his phone outside. And like he has good enough reception right now that he has perfect internet clarity, no buffering. I have buffering here in Florida, like but no buffering. Like how does he have such perfect internet? I don't get that good at internet on a day-to-day basis. And he was right on the east, like in the war area. So yeah, the severity of things, I do not think the Western media is telling us the truth.
then you will happily cooperate with the International Criminal Court. If you're not guilty of any of these things, presumably you will cooperate with the International Criminal Court. Even if you don't recognize that court.
We do not support and we do not recognize International Criminal Court, and we're not the only country in the world who are doing that. So this is number one. And we are interested in really independent and then the objective investigation of all the crimes. But we want just we want to understand what could be the format of such an investigation, because we have a bitter experience of international investigations, like with the grounded Korean aircraft international investigation, and we were not let into that investigation, so we cannot consider it to be objective.
So I mean, there are other special tribunals. There are other special tribunals that you could cooperate with. My only point is that if you haven't done this, then why don't you just cooperate with the tribunals or the International Criminal Court?
Well,
just do it. Just do it. Yeah, he's not going to see any fucking nuance. Not at all. Not that the U.S. would never listen to the International Criminal Court, that the U.S. has more war criminals than anybody. Never going to play to that nuance.
Not even tribunals. We don't know about the existence of tribunals. And I repeat, we do not recognize international court.
Let me put this to you. You deny responsibility then quite clearly. What you can't deny is that civilians, many civilians, including women and children, have died as a result of this onslaught, and they would be alive today had you not invaded Ukraine. I think it's 142 children so far. You yourself have children. You have a young daughter. When you see the images, how does it make you feel? How do you sleep at night?
It's not about my sleep at night, actually. And this is about Ukrainian military and Ukrainian nationalistic military personnel trying to use civil people as a shield, as a civil shield. So they're covering themselves with civil people and not letting them flee the town or flee the city. And from the very beginning,
Ukraine wouldn't let 18 to 60-year-olds leave the country that were men. 18 to 60. If you wanted to flee the country, you were not allowed to. From the very beginning. How come he didn't mention that? That's weird. It's kind of odd. Got left out.
Were never shelling civil objects. They were just aiming and using high precision missiles to attack military infrastructure of Ukraine, because
there must have been a lot of, well, sir, forgive me for interrupting, but there must have been a lot of Ukrainian military and a lot of civilian buildings then, because our reporters have been out and about in many of these towns and cities.
Exactly, this is the point.
No, I mean, it defies belief that many of the targets that we've seen destroyed are military targets. But I was talking to you really, not as a Kremlin spokesman, I was talking to you, as a father.
Not as a Kremlin spokesman, but as a father. I want to touch you personally. Because I'm a millionaire, and I'm trying to get an emotional response that I want.
As a human being, when you see these images, how do you sleep at night? That was really my question.
That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy, and our military are doing their best to bring an end to that operation. And we do hope that in coming days, in foreseeable future, this operation will reach its goals, or will finish it by the negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegation.
I mean, do you think this can possibly end in a negotiation or talks after what has happened?
It can. It will strongly depend on the consistency of Ukrainian position, and to what extent they will be ready to meet our conditions.
Boris Johnson has said that Russia's, and I quote, this is a quote, Russia's despicable attacks on innocent civilians in Irpin and Bucha are yet more evidence that Putin and his army are committing war crimes in Ukraine. We will not rest until justice is served. What's your message to Boris Johnson?
Well, he's very loud in his rhetorics about Russia from the very beginning of the operation. So, in our understanding, he's rather not constructive in his attitude. We have never heard any similar rhetorics coming from Boris Johnson during the last 8 years. when people in Donbass were killed by Ukrainian nationalists, when they were heavily bombarded and shelled by heavy artillery.
We also changed the age of combatants to make sure they fit into things. One of the way USA, when we kill civilians, we change the numbers like, oh, anybody between the age of 15 and 65 is a combatant now. Only children are civilians. Anybody in the age of 15 to 65 is a combatant. Only children and elderly are civilians. So there's ways around that too.
Every word coming from Mr. Johnson.
But it is scarcely
when you
comparable.
control the numbers.
Does, in light of what Mr. Johnson has said, does Mr. Putin worry about ending up in a war crimes court?
No, he's not.
Have you talked to him about that? Does he realize that it's a possibility?
Well, we don't see any possibility for that.
But you have spoken about it, have you?
We've read lots of reports coming from various countries, politologists and so-called specialists in Russia discussing such a possibility, but we don't consider this possibility to be realistic.
You see, one of the problems with these blanket denials is that isn't the problem for you and for Mr. Putin that very few...
You have blanket accusations, but you're going to call out his blanket denials. Fantastic. Fantastic. I need a drink, but this guy is... Wow. Just wow.
People outside Russia believe a single word that you say about all this.
Why do you think it's a few people? It's a great amount of people. It's a great amount of people who understand concerns of Russia and who have been understanding those concerns during the last couple of decades. And the world, you have to understand that the world is bigger than Europe and the United States and Great Britain. It's much bigger.
Is it? But I mean, in the last hour, you've just been kicked off the UN Human Rights Council. So that is what much of the world thinks about Russia and about the alleged war crimes coming out now.
We're sorry about that, and we'll continue to defend our interests using every possible legal means. We'll continue to defend our interests and to explain ourselves.
The problem with the lies that many international leaders are accusing you of is it's not new, is it? I mean, look, you can look just recently at the lies from Russia. Just the recent ones. The Ukrainians, you say, shot down Malaysian Airlines MH17 in 2014. The Syrian opposition gassed their own people. The white helmets in Syria are terrorists who belong to Al-Qaeda. Navalny, Putin's opponent, collapsed because...
White helmets are terrorists that are funded by the U.S. and British. Yeah, that's true.
Not because he was poisoned. The GRU agents who were in Salisbury came to see a cathedral. In 2014, again, there are no Russian troops in Crimea or in Donbass. And then just a few weeks ago, we are not going to invade Ukraine. I mean, none of those are true, are they? None of those are true. Which one of those is true? Which one of those is true?
Let's start from the very beginning. What was number one?
Ukrainians, you say the Ukrainians shot down Malaysian Airlines MH17 in 2014. I mean, you're not going to tell me that that's true.
Well, there are lots of evidence. There are lots of technical calculations, and they were all submitted to the court in The Hague. There is a huge deficit of proofs and technical data in the.
I think anybody that believes anything led by Biden is going to do anything is ridiculous. Biden's a jackass, and he will accomplish nothing. He doesn't want to accomplish anything. He literally said nothing will fundamentally change. So yeah, no, we're not going in and arresting Putin. We're not going to regime change Putin. And if they think that sanctions are going to turn the Russian people against them eventually, it's fucking stupid, man. I heard somebody say this is a calculated guess of how much power they can take away from Russia because Russia was getting too powerful and they were trying to put a check on China because China's getting close to taking over the U.S. as the most powerful country in the world. So putting a check on Russia was putting a check on China as well.
Different points of view.
And the GRU agents in Salisbury came to see the cathedral. I mean, look, the problem here is a problem of trust, that people don't trust what you say. When you have a major country, hugely important culturally, hugely important historically, And people now don't believe a word the leadership says. That is a problem, isn't it?
Which people?
Nobody believes the U.S. government. Nobody believes British government. People think Boris is a jackass. Let's go Brandon is something I see on a daily basis. Like, come on, man.
Many of the international leaders, most of the West, many of the international leaders.
Many of them, yes, they say that they don't believe, but many of the leaders believe, and they tend to explore. They tend to listen to our point of view, and we find their position much more constructive and much more attractive for us.
But it's a problem in any dialogue, any future negotiations, that people don't trust you, particularly over NATO. I mean, Vladimir Putin embarked on this military operation, basically saying it was to counter, partly to counter the expansion of NATO in Eastern Europe. Well, NATO has more troops now in Eastern Europe. Germany is increasing its defense spending. I mean, NATO is stronger now than it was. It's stronger, not weaker.
Yeah, and thus we have to rebalance the situation, and we have to take additional measures to ensure our own security, because we are deeply convinced that NATO is a machine for confrontation. It's not a peaceful alliance. It was tailored for confrontation, and the main purposes of its existence to confront our country. But this is a very unfortunate situation, but we have to take it into account.
But you see, NATO is a defensive organization, and Finland.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Biden like hinting at regime change in one of his speeches, and then the press jumping on it. Like, Biden's going senile, so him hinting at it is ridiculous. Us thinking about it is also ridiculous.
Finland and Sweden. Finland has an 800-mile border with your country. They now want to join NATO as a result of all this. What would Russia do if Finland and Sweden joined NATO?
We'll have to rebalance the situation. I repeat again, and then we'll have to make our western flank more sophisticated in terms of ensuring our security.
But when you say rebalance, I mean, President Putin has warned of serious military and political consequences. I just wonder what that means.
Well, we'll have to, it's everything about mutual deterring, and should one side, and we consider NATO to be.
NATO's 1990 Serbia Montenegro skirmish was destabilizing. It created Jeffrey Epstein. That was his first big, grabbing up Middle Eastern girls, young girls. That was his first big power grab.
One side, should one side be more powerful than the other, especially in terms of nuclear arms, then it will constitute a threat for the whole architecture of security. And it will take us to take additional measures to strengthen our potential.
But would you, just very quickly on that, finally, would you consider that an existential threat? Because that is, you have said it would take an existential threat to use nuclear weapons, which you've just mentioned.
What exactly? Another enlargement of NATO?
You would consider that an existential threat?
No, I don't think so.
Right. Would you consider pressure on your economy, or sanctions that you deemed were to wreck your economy, topple the regime? Would you consider that an existential threat?
Well, no. We've been living under sanctions for a couple of decades, and we have got accustomed to that situation. And we've started to prepare ourselves for these sanctions a year ago, and so now, of course, we are in a very tight situation in terms of economy, but our economy is still on its feet, and we are quite well. We're safe, maybe not safe and sound, but we're safe in terms of economy, in terms of macro stability. And we're trying to take advantage out of this situation, giving a boost to development of our productive sector, of our national technologies, and so on and so forth.
And just finally, you've accused Ukraine of being a fascist regime, but isn't it Russia that is increasingly looking like a fascist state? All the hallmarks of fascism, the shutting down of all opposition, the strict censorship of the media, the sinister Z sign that is appearing, and just the climate of fear. Doesn't that all have a feeling of fascism about it?
No, well, I consider it quite unacceptable to speak about in that way about my country.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they just oppose us. Day-to-day life for Russians doesn't seem that bad. any worse than America. So it's very interesting the way they take it. You live in a totalitarian dictatorship and blah blah blah. People who are trying to escape persecution, people. I mean, it's just a different safe haven, really.
No, the answer is definitely no. The answer is no. And asking this question, I would suggest that you just recall last 8 years with Nazis demonstrations on the streets of Kiev, on the streets of Lvov, with people who were parts of Nazis regiments during the Second World War, carrying Nazi signs and Nazi flags, and performing Nazi. What I don't know the English word for that.
Nazi.
But those Nazi.
I don't know the English word for it, but we know it very well over here because they had to fight them off.
Well, it was a reality. It was a reality on the streets of Ukrainian cities.
But the last election, the far-right parties barely won 2% of the vote. I mean, you've got to keep this in proportion. Look, my final question is this. What is to come? Because only Vladimir Putin knows that. Presumably more bombardments, presumably more death. Who knows, maybe more war crimes. My final...
Edward Snowden is in Russia. Elizabeth DeVos is a journalist who's hidden to Russia. Ava Bartlett has moved to Russia because she wanted somewhere in the east so she could report on Syria and Iraq better. And she chose Russia as her living spot for here on out. It's just somewhere to live. It's a capitalist society that does not go along with the U.S. World Bank order, the Western civilization and whatnot. So a lot of people go there. I mean, and they day-to-day life is very, very casual.
The question is, you've ripped away the future of two countries, immediate future for two countries, Russia, your own country, and Ukraine. And my final question is it all worth it? Honestly, is it all worth it?
The whole story is about future. It's about guaranteeing our future. Just imagine a situation when a member of NATO, Ukraine, thinking about returning of Crimea, attacks Russia and attacks Russian Crimea, and using an Article number 5 of NATO Charter, NATO countries possessing nukes will have to defend Ukraine.
Yeah.
It should be a third world war. And what is being done is to save us from any potential threat of such a war.
But it was never going to happen, was it, like that? But listen, Mr. Peskov, appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Well, it's kind of a garbage attack ad the whole time, but he got through it. Man, I want to keep going, but I had surgery this week, and that was why I was so spotty in the early part of the week, and I am just fucking sore. I need to take some painkillers. So I'm going to take some painkillers and probably zonk out, eat some food. But I can't eat, so I'm going to drink some food. But yeah, fucking, man, the Western narrative and the Eastern narrative on this is so different. And it's really, yeah. This is a rough issue, guys. So stay woke. Thanks for hanging out tonight. See you later, Xerxes. Thanks for hanging out again. Yeah, I'm going to take some painkillers and drink a smoothie. Peace out, guys. Stay stony, stay woke, keep your head above sand, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for hanging out. And good night.